Hey everyone, thanks for joining in. I'm Len. I'm doing partnership at Kinetic, or pretty much everything that's non-technical, non-dev related. Yeah, I've been with Kinetic for about 3 months, and yeah, super excited of building this up, and super excited to yeah, hear everyone's question today. In terms of background. I've worked in at a blockchain venture in 2018 for around 2 years, but since then have been doing some marketing related stuff. So not so much in the blockchain in terms of the 9 to 5 job, I guess. But obviously, always had my kind of feet inside DeFi and especially once Terra kind of came up and about. So yeah, I definitely would consider myself a lunatic in that sense, but super pumped to be on this today and yeah, hear what questions you guys have for us.
Yeah, it's great to have you both here. Speaking of the team, is there a larger team that sits behind the screen at Kinetic, and how did you come to build on Terra specifically?
Yeah, so there's about 6 or 7 of us, uh, varying from front end design, DevOps, and memes, and legal ops, and a data analytics person. So there's definitely a few of us. They like to be more behind the scenes, and so that's what they're focusing on. And then Lenny and I are trying to be more forward facing.
So, how's the holiday period over the last month? Trying to spend some time with family and also get this thing moving towards launch.
So at least for me, luckily enough, I'm in Europe and my family is not in Europe and in the States, and so I didn't want to go back to the States and deal with traveling, and because of all this like Corona and all the stress with like maybe missing a flight because you don't have a test, and so I decided to stay, and so I was cooped up at home and really just coding away, trying to get everything done, and then hopped on a few family calls.
Heads down and focus. Nice.
Yeah, on my side, pretty similar. I have family here, so I'm located in Germany, and I am from Germany, so I have family around the corner here. But we just spent 2 or 3 days there, and then straight back to focusing on launch for sure.
Cool. So, talking about the project, do you want to give everyone here an intro into what is Kinetic Money and where the inspiration came from?
Yeah, so funny enough, the project kind of started randomly. It was a friend of mine started his own project in a different ecosystem, and we were looking for names for his project. We were kind of like looking at synonyms of entropy, and Kinetic came on, and then I really liked the name Kinetic, and then went online and to like Namecheap and saw that Kinetic.money is available, bought the domain, and then I was like, okay, let's figure out what to build now. And then like looking at the DeFi ecosystem on Terra and kind of like what's missing, we kind of like settled on building a product similar to Alchemix.
So the name came before the idea. That's quite unusual.
Yeah.
But I guess a lot of people here in Terra may be not familiar with Alchemix. So I mean, I think we get the headline self-repaying loans. Do you want to talk a little bit to how that works and how you're going to take the application from the ETH native version to a Terra version?
Yeah, definitely. So in short, what Alchemix and Kinetic aim to do is a user comes in and deposits a asset, a collateral type. We can use UST for our example. So the user comes in and deposits UST. This UST is then directed towards a yield-bearing protocol like Anchor, and then on inside the vault, the user is able to take out a loan derived of the collateral of derived of the denomination of the collateral, meaning that if UST is deposited, then a synthetic of UST is able to be minted, in this case KUST. So if Luna is deposited, then like K Luna could be minted as a loan. If K atom, K soul, all these things are deposited, then they'll be able to take out loans in the synthetic. And so in turn, what happens on the back end is every so often, a harvest function is called. And this harvest function just looks at the yield bearing protocol and says, okay, I deposited this amount of money, this amount of collateral in your protocol. And now I've waited X amount of days, X amount of minutes, and there should be some yield that was generated from this. And in turn, it takes that yield into the kinetic system, into the kinetic vault, and pays down the global debt. And so right now, so when a user takes out debt, they take out a loan, and this is counted as debt towards their account. And now, if a user doesn't have a loan, an outstanding loan, then the yield is credited to their system. So in this case, if a user takes out, if a user deposits 100 UST and doesn't take out any yield for any synthetic for the next year, that means there's a 20%, there's $120 now in that account. Well, now instead of like taking out $120, the user can take out a loan of up to $70, meaning if the user takes out $70, then the account is reset to zero and there's no debt and there's no credit. Now, the overarching question is kind of like, where does that yield go after it helps pay down the system? In our case, it gets sent to the phaser. And what the phaser does is it does two things. First of all, it sends all these tokens that it receives from the vault back into the yield-bearing protocol in order to receive a higher yield for the people participating in the vault. And the second part is it helps maintain the peg of the synthetic and the collateral. So in this case, we want to maintain the peg between KUST and UST. And so there's many ways to maintain the peg, the first being arbitrage. So the interesting thing here is if you take out a loan of, let's say, $100, and then you go and use those KUST tokens, let's say on some credit system, some debit card system, and then all of a sudden you have an outstanding loan for $100, and all of a sudden, let's say in a scenario where the peg breaks down to like 95 cents, well, now it's like you can go buy 100 KUST for $95, and then repay your $100 loan in the system, because in the system, 1 KUST is always equal to 1 UST. And so in this sense, you essentially made just $5. So that's the first way the peg can be assisted to be maintained. But the second is the phaser, where essentially if you don't have an outstanding loan, or if you don't have anything to repay in the vault, then you can stake your KUST, and over a period of X amount of blocks, the KUST will be phased into UST. And so in this sense, as long as there is funds in the phaser to withstand the phasing, then the KUST token will always be, the synthetic will always be worth the collateral. And so this is like the foundation of Kinetic, and this is very similar to Alchemix. There are a few minor variations in terms of how we distribute tokens to the yield-bearing parts, but also we kind of chose to start at this point in a very similar point to Alchemix to set a foundation. Alchemix, we love Alchemix. We're heavy users of it in the Ethereum world, and we want to use it as a foundation to build more products in the future.
Can you give us some examples of use cases where a user may want to take a self-repaying loan, both on like classic Ethereum use cases and maybe some Terra-specific use cases?
Yeah, so the overarching goal is anywhere that's accepting UST. So pay with Terra, Kosh, Kato, White Whale, Kujira, Angel, like anywhere that's accepting UST, we want to work on integrating KUST with them. And so the immediate use case that we would really love to see is a kind of debit credit card. And this is a feature that we have planned and we have designed, we just haven't implemented yet within the vaults. And the idea is essentially you go and swipe your card at a 7-Eleven or a Späti, and then when you're swiping your card essentially draws from your CDP and it draws KUST in order to like pay your transaction. And so in this sense, it's in a way like a credit debit card, because it's a repaying loan, and so over time it will be repaid. And so that's like a really interesting and something that like I'm very excited about. Len can definitely give a lot more ideas.
For sure, and I think the cool thing, what Mark just explained, is that when the user essentially swipes their card, instead of what you usually would do is, let's say there's a UST balance behind the card and it's earning yield in Anchor or some other way. What usually would happen is you just lower your collateral by spending money essentially, so you have less collateral that's earning your money. However, if you do that strategy by taking out the CDP of KUST and using that for covering whatever you pay, you're essentially not lowering your collateral, meaning there's more money at work at all times, and that money will gradually pay off your loan. But you you can make more yield by having obviously the higher collateral. Obviously, we want to kind of abstract that and have the user potentially not even know about they're doing it. So one big thing on my focus is to get some partners on board, and we had a lot of good conversations. So I'm sure after launch, after we have our Kinetic SDK out there, I think there we'll see a adoption of kind of this idea fairly quickly. Another one, I guess, that's actually Mark's favorite use case, is kind of payment streaming. Similar idea, but it's not only about a debit card. It's about kind of any payment can really be done by taking out a loan on your collateral and having the loan paid back automatically.
Yeah, I think Jimmy's been saying in the GT Capital Telegram group for probably about 6 months now, of whenever he first heard about Kinetic, that he's going to buy a MacBook and have it pay the loan back itself.
Yeah, that's with the new MacBooks coming out every couple of years, it's a good excuse to just get a new MacBook and then have the loan pay out by the next year, and then just get a new one the following year.
Yeah, exactly. So just to kind of replay back some of the walkthrough that we've been through here. So you mentioned users depositing collateral. Now, you mentioned UST, Luna, Atom, etc. Is there is V1 going to be just UST, or will you be able to deposit Luna as collateral as well?
So we want to focus on UST as the first use case, and really set the ball in motion with UST and bring it to a stable place with a constant factor of growth. And then after that, we want to look at expanding out. We want to, because Anchor will be like our foundational UST yield, we are very focused on the yield reserve of Anchor right now, and seeing how that can evolve. And so it's really dependent on multiple factors on how fast we introduce new asset pairs. But we definitely want to add more and add quickly.
Okay, cool. So I think everyone's ears picked up when you mentioned K Luna, because we're getting a whole alphabet full of different types of Luna at the minute. So MVP products essentially will be UST. So when I deposit my UST into Kinetic, so let's say I deposit 1,000 UST in there. How much will I be able to borrow?
Right now, we have a rough a lower bound of 50%, but we're running some simulations right now in which we would consider like increasing it from 50% to possibly higher, like 60, 70%. But it really at the end of the day, as we run those simulations, we'll kind of figure out what the protocol will be most healthy with. And be it that if we start at the lower bound 50%, at like what stages can we increase that to 60 or possibly 70%? There is, so I know Doe mentioned a couple times Chronos, the kind of like credit score system that would essentially be coming to Luna. And this kind of really perked our ears, and we started thinking about how we could use the Chronos system to possibly offer some accounts higher collateralization limits because they have a higher credit score on Terra. And so we're really excited to play with that idea a lot.
That's a really interesting application for sure. So I'm depositing UST. I'm borrowing KUST at up to 50%, maybe 60 or 70%, depending on how you guys can progress things. Now, my view is that you're then putting that UST into AUST and using that yield to essentially pay off the loan over time. Is that the only is that the main source of yield, or do you guys have any other strategies to increase the yield from that UST?
Yeah, so this has also like been a very interesting subject for us. So also to clear up, you will also be able to deposit AUST, not only UST. This is primarily because there's close to 3 billion AUST just sitting in people's wallets, and asking people to unwind that back into UST only to rewind that back into AUST seems a bit cumbersome. So users will be able to deposit and withdraw AUST directly from Kinetic. And the other yield, so we are really interested in Prism and adding Prism Y tokens to Kinetic. And so in this sense, this would be a different than a UST strategy. But in this sense, we would allow users to deposit their Y assets into Kinetic. And then those Y assets would help pay back the loan, the debt of the system or of the individuals who have deposited that Y asset. We find this really interesting because that means certain individuals who deposit Y Luna or Y any asset could push their yield far above the protocol's minimum.
Can you talk a little bit about the mechanism in which the phaser can boost yield returns?
Yeah, so essentially after the Volt harvests the yield and sends it to the phaser puts the UST back into the yield bearing protocol, be it Anchor or some other money market that will come to Terra, or some other yield bearing protocol. So it puts it back into the yield bearing protocol, and now the phaser itself is generating yield. And so after the phaser generates yield, instead of harvesting it and sending it back, sending it somewhere else, what essentially does is it calls a message on the Volt contract that pays down the global debt. So you can, for example, if there is 20 million UST in the Volt and 20 million UST in the phaser, this would essentially double the yield on that original 20 million in the Volt, therefore making twice as much Anchor yield.
So I think this is quite a big deal where folks would be incredibly interested in using Kinetic just for this feature alone. Where, when I used Kinetic early last year, the Alchemix early last year, I realized that, we've talked a lot about protocol and liquidity, these last 6 months, and emissions, and the idea of war chests and treasuries being able to generate yield for, creating value for the underlying token. But now that I think about it, like, this phaser transmuter kind of idea is like the OG protocol on liquidity, right? That the treasury, but in this case, like the phaser is essentially, holding a whole bunch of UST that's generating yield, and instead of just, just instead of just holding on to this money for future uses, it's just boosting everyone's return and just boosting how quickly their debts are being repaid, right? So,
Exactly.
and if I did the math right, like on a 50% loan to value borrow, and if it's being repaid back at twice the rate of the current anchor yield, then it would take roughly about 1.5 years for that loan to be paid back, right? So just with the whole laptop example, like if I wanted to buy, a $4,000 MacBook every 18 months, I would shove $8,000 into Kinetic, borrow 50%, go buy that laptop, and every year and a half I can just get like the latest and greatest shiny object.
Yeah, for us, there's definitely been a few moments. At the core, of course, like everyone on the team loves to like degen and like ape into various things on Ethereum, and a lot of it into Terra and various other protocols. And there's been so many moments that was like, oh, if we only had Kinetic on Terra like launched today, this would be so much simpler, or like we could like ape even more into this other protocol. And so we've definitely had those moments where it's like, if we're saying those things, that means there's definitely other people saying the same thing.
Would it be fair to say that like if I deposited a whole bunch of Y Luna inside, some future version of Kinetic, that I could potentially boost my debt repayment to something ridiculous, like, going from 1.5 years to 1 year to 6 months to maybe even like, I don't know, like weeks worth of repayment on a 50% loan?
Yeah, this is like the most interesting thing. I mean, um, with the with Luna being burned every day, the staking return going up, and then we've talked with like the Prism folks on like how to collaborate on this front, and it's like we've like played around with some like possible numbers, and the amount of yield that you'd be able to generate from something like this is definitely higher than what you'd be generating just holding your assets in Anchor alone, or Anchor and or some other protocol.
So with Luna, I feel like it's a lot different than all of the other like potential B assets, right? Like for
Yes.
Luna, we can mint or say burn the Luna staking rewards into UST directly, but with like Be ETH or Be Sol, Be Atom, you're essentially selling these the staking rewards for those proof of stake assets and turning it into UST. Whereas for the Y Luna portion, you're essentially, by using Kinetic, you're helping us, uh, and just using the Kinetic protocol, you're just helping the burn rate of Luna even further.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. This is what makes the integration with Luna so interesting. I don't think there's another chain where you can do something like this. So like the way Terra is designed really brings a huge benefit to Kinetic, and adding Y assets or just Luna yield back to users.
Okay, awesome. And I'm sure we could talk about strategies all day, but I know there's a bunch of other stuff about the protocol and the launch sequence and everything like that we want to chat about. So maybe I can defer to Ryan to continue on with the convo.
Yeah, Jimmy's gone into full Imaginor mode there, I think, but that's all good. I see people are starting to line up for questions, so I think if we just maybe wanted to cover off the governance token aspect of the protocol, and then we'll move to questions. So if you do have questions, start raising your hand now. So yeah, Mark, just over in terms of the governance token, there's I believe it's the CNTC governance token that's going to be releasing alongside the protocol. Perhaps you can talk a little bit first to kind of what function does the token have, how does it accrue value, and then maybe moving into how will the token be distributed.
Yeah, definitely. It's KNTC. So basically, KNTC will help govern the protocol and help govern the treasury, and really be used with stakers. And so from day one, the protocol fees of Kinetic will be sent to stakers. And how users will be able to stake is similar to what we've been seeing with Astroport and with the recent Prism announcement, is that there will be an XKNTC, and so the Kinetic staked will be auto compounding. And where do kind of like the incentives kind of come from? So the protocol fees are split into roughly 3 to 4 different groups, and the groups break down as 12.5% for Angel Protocol. Shout out to Angel. And then 25% to the dev fund, but the dev fund is capped. And the reason we chose to opt for a dev fund is because Kinetic is entirely self-funded. So we did not do any sort of raise pre-launch. And so we would like to hire more people full-time. And to do so, we want to kind of get some funds in through the door. But then the rest of these funds are sent to stakers. So roughly 62.5% are sent to stakers from protocol fees. But after the dev fund cap is reached, then that other 25% is also sent to the stakers. And then once the dev fund kind of dips below the cap, then it's redirected. So we saw this as like, we don't want the dev fund to grow immensely. We want it to like be sustainable, and then the rest just go to stakers.
And at what point are you capturing those protocol fees?
So the protocol fees, there is a small percent taken on the harvest fee. So we may be starting with like 5 to 10% of the harvest fee, which it would equate would bring the overall yield of Kinetic down from like, I think it's like 19.5% right now on Anchor, and it would be reduced to just 19%. So just taking that little amount out in order to pay back stakers and stakers, Angel Protocol, and the dev fund. Now, past that, we aim to bring on as much protocol-owned liquidity as we can from day one. And so this is kind of like how the launch sequence is quite complex, I'd say. We're still working on the details, but in short, we're aiming to do a lock drop event in which users will be able to lock UST token in return for KNTC. And what this UST will be used on inside the protocol is for seeding the phaser and also seeding a KUST UST pool. And so the interesting thing here is, while many other protocols that are doing lock drops, the user kind of suffers from impermanent loss based on how long they lock up their tokens in the protocol. And so in Kinetic, since the tokens are being used on a stable swap pool, the chance of impermanent loss is very minimal to none. And so essentially, you're not losing out. There's no opportunity loss for participating in the lock drop. And so phase one is lock drop and an airdrop. We previously mentioned some airdrops on Twitter. And then phase two will be an LBP. The LBP will be similar to Angel, similar to White Whale, and the LBP will be transitioned into the AMM pool for Kinetic.
Okay, cool. So 3 stages: lock drop, which is essentially people locking up their UST for a specific amount of time in exchange for X amount of Kinetic tokens. You then got the airdrop. I don't know if you want to speak any more to that, because it's a very generous airdrop. I think probably, given that you haven't had to take any VC funds, you've been able to put a larger proportion of tokens into that bucket. And then the third, and then finishing off with an LBP that will then take the token into essentially launch phase.
Yeah, we're quite happy with this design. Well, I say that now, as coding it is definitely not making me happy, and not making some of the team members happy, just because there's an added amount of complexity and there's a lot of testing to be done. And so this is so the nice thing here is, like, on the lock drop, you're not really losing out to impermanent loss with locking your UST in the protocol. And we find that there's going to be a pretty high percentage of tokens, liquid tokens from day one. And this was definitely enabled by not taking extra money from VCs and not selling part of the protocol.
If I could just reiterate, okay, yeah, we have the airdrop, but I think the important thing to note is like that lock drop, when you said it's seeding, the KUST, the UST pool, as well as the phaser. Those are all the mechanisms that will help one keep the peg of the synthetic stablecoin KUST, as well as boosting the anchor returns, right? So the more funds that you raise from the lock drop, is it fair to say that the higher the boosted yields may become in the phaser?
Yeah. So the higher amount of funds raised in the lock drop will enable a higher amount of yield from day one. So of course the interesting thing here is from research based on what we've seen with Alchemix, the peg is like fairly well maintained, and so the LUSD peg is fairly well maintained without the phaser, and so the without the transmuter in their case, so the phaser ends up just accruing more and more tokens in order to just earn higher yield. So as the protocol lives on, there's a pretty high potential for just higher and higher yield as more collateral is deposited into the vault and more harvested yield is sent to the phaser. So if we start out with let's say 30%, and then it dips up below because the amount of collateral coming in is very high and very fast, in the long run, it will come back up to 30% or higher because the phaser is just constantly fed with more and more tokens.
And then I'm curious, you're launching right around a year after Alchemix has launched, and I'm just curious of a couple of the lessons you've learned as you've witnessed them over the last year, and some of the ideas that you've planned on implementing with Kinetic.
Yeah, so we definitely had a few learnings. We've talked with the Alchemix crew and worked with them on a few things and really enjoy them. They've definitely inspired a lot of people and inspired us for Kinetic. The learnings have definitely been more around how to like increase the protocol, how to like more stabilize the protocol, and of course like learning from the security hacks that happened over the last year, and more other ones that kind of were caught before launch. And so learning from those have definitely been good things. And so those are like been our core learnings. There's definitely been like more small things that we've focused on, and there's definitely some more questions that like we're also talking with them right now, because looping is definitely on our mind right now.
I guess for those not familiar, what would you, I guess, elaborate a bit on the recursive or looping issue?
Yeah, so basically right now, a user so right now on Anchor, there's a protocol called MIM that has like a degen box that is essentially allowing users to loop over the Anchor yield multiple times, and I believe the APY there is 100%. And so with Kinetic, this becomes a bit easier, and so we're trying to think of ways to benefit the protocol for users that are doing this. So in the sense that either more fees are going to stakers if more people are looping, because looping tends to have a tendency to destabilize a protocol. So talking with Alchemix and in the early days on their podcast, they were a bit concerned with looping as well, especially in the infancy of the protocol. I'd say they were able to like live through it. But with Kinetic, it's essentially a loop. One loop would be that you deposit $100 into Kinetic, you take out 50K UST, you swap it for UST, and then you just deposit another $50 into your Volt, and then you take out $25, swap it to UST, deposit back in the Volt, and then after a couple times, the yield that you're generating is higher than your original yield, in the sense that you're leveraging your tokens.
So it essentially creates like instability for the KUST pair. Is that right? As people are dumping a bunch of the KUST into that pair to continue looping their position.
Exactly. So we do plan on quite heavily incentivizing the KUST UST pool. So users will be able to add, and then from the lock drop user, there will be like a decent amount of funds in there already. And we have roughly a runway of 2 to 4 years of incentivization. And then after that, we hope to have a large amount of protocol owned liquidity. And but we do plan on distributing more of the stakers, more of the protocol fees to LP incentives if needed at that point.
Yeah, I did note that, the emission schedules for the ALCX token was quite, I guess, controversial within like the first 6 months of the protocol or so, and then more recently, their forums are such a great source of information and the thinking behind Scoopy and the team. I've seen that most of their emissions now are not even going to LP incentives, right? They're going towards, participating in the curve wars, to curve wars and the bribes to essentially accumulate CVX and curve. So I think the equivalent for us on Terra would be, essentially the Kinetic Treasury owning a whole bunch of Astro tokens and gauge voting for the KUST UST pair. Does that sound right?
Yes, that is definitely right. So yeah, we're definitely focusing. We're in their forums, reading, trying to learn from them, and speaking to them more and more as we inch closer to launch.
Okay, cool. Ryan, I guess, do you want to finish up and maybe grab some questions from the audience as well?
No, we had a couple of speakers lined up, but they have all backed out. So if anyone wants to put their hand up and ask a question to the team, we can do. If not, I think you guys have got some questions from Twitter that we could potentially be cracking on with whilst we're waiting for people. Here we go.
Testing.
Cedric, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, how you guys doing?
Good, and yourself?
Good. So one, I just want to be clear on a few things. So let's say, you deposit $10,000, you're able to borrow $5,000. In 18 months, you're stating that loan will be paid. So the 50% loan will be paid back within 18 months. Did I get that clear so far?
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely like projected numbers. Of course, as the protocol grows and lives, the numbers may differ, but we are aiming to have a higher yield than Anchor itself.
Gotcha. So my next question would be, let's say, for instance, I deposit the money, take the collateral, but then life happens or whatever, and I need to get that money back. As long as you pay back the collateral, what you borrowed, you're able to take your collateral back out. Like, is there lock-in periods of the collateral no matter what, or as long as you pay back your loan, you're good?
As long as you pay back your loan, you'll be good. So there is a way to like liquidate yourself. Of course, it's a liquidate free protocol. But if, let's say, you have $2,000 outstanding, but let's say you need the 8,000 in UST to like off ramp or do something, then you could call the liquidate, in which it would take 2,000 from your initial collateral and give you the 8,000 back if you don't want to wait for the entire loan to pay back itself.
Perfect. So I guess that kind of answers my last question, because my last question would be, how often does it pay back? Basically, so say if I owe the 50%, say if I borrow 50%, would I be able to perpetually borrow more as it's paying itself back to keep me at 50%? And how often do then paybacks come into the account?
Yeah, so basically, you could do it in the sense of you put in 10,000, you take out like a $1,000 loan, use it for that month, and then by the end of the month, you can take out another 1,000, or you take out that whole 5,000, and then let's say within 1 month it pays back 1,000. You can take out that 1,000 again and use it the next month. Do the same thing. So as long as the as long as the harvest function is being called, the overall debt of the system will be going down, meaning you can take out more loans as long as it's under your collateralization limit.
And do you guys like do this monthly? Is that how? Is it like when do these like payments, whatever, however it pays itself back? Like when will we see that in our own account? Like is that monthly? Is that daily?
It's going to be like we will be calling the harvest function. The harvest function has a limit of, I believe we are setting it to every 5 to 10 minutes. So it can be called every 5 to 10 minutes, or it can be called longer. But we plan on calling it at least once to twice a day.
Cool, man. Thanks. That's it for me.
All right, thank you.
Really great questions there. Just an add-on question there. So I can't partially withdraw collateral, but I can essentially self liquidate to withdraw the remainder of my collateral. Is that correct?
Correct.
Got you. So you can only get your collateral back in full once you've fully paid off a loan.
Yeah.
Cool. Got you. Yeah, great question, Cedric. Next up, I've got Block Muncher. Come in with your question.
Love the name.
Thanks. Hi. Yeah, so you touched on this a little bit. I guess I'm kind of really curious if you guys have talked to, it sounds like you're already considering with Anchor Protocol, if you're talking to them about sustainability of their entire ecosystem, because it sounds like, at least with your initial V1, what you were calling it, it's you're heavily relying on Anchor earn yields, and I'm wondering about the borrow side and how that ends up making sure that you're not or just like the MIM DGen box, like you were mentioning, is not helping on the borrow side of Anchor. Just what your thoughts there, if there was anything else that you didn't touch on before.
Yeah, the interesting, so we have like a hypothesis that since we're allowing users to deposit AUST on top of UST, that a lot of users that just have AUST sitting in their account will deposit it into Kinetic. And so in this sense, we wouldn't necessarily be adding too much on top of the existing, but we have gone back and forth internally on this. It is a very hot subject, and we are talking to Anchor here and there on like various schemes, and we are running through some data ourselves and various designs to help like protocol safety come into fruition. We've also gone as far to like talk about how we ourselves can also incentivize like the borrower side if need be, to like help things out there. But I do think the Anchor team is very aware of what's going on, and I'm pretty confident in them that they have like a plan on how to attack this with adding different types of yield bearing tokens. So adding Sol, adding Atom, adding all these other tokens is definitely seems like it's up their alley. But yeah, we plan on getting way more involved in Anchor governance and Anchor protocol design, even to the point where we may even put some devs to help assist get a feature through the door if needed.
Cool. Thanks. I'm glad you're not going into that. Awesome.
I guess I have a follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, so like I haven't dived too deep into like Alchemix v2, but I know like they're allowing, say, like multiple collateral types and multiple strategies. As far as like on the Terra ecosystem, I think the other money markets that are coming on board in the near future are going to be, say, Mars and Edge, maybe some UST vaults coming from, say, white whale arbitraging, or I think Yield Foundry DAO. They're doing something interesting with their Hedge Plus program. I guess my question is, how flexible is the Kinetic vaults in where they deploy and harvest the UST yields?
So they are pretty dynamic in terms of how they're designed. It's designed to accept multiple strategies. Just in the initial version, we are kind of like leaving it as like one strategy, and then plan on doing a contract migration in order to upgrade to allow multiple strategies. Kind of like stabilize the first version and get it tested, get it in use, and then introduce the second part.
So like you're creating your own yield aggregator, right? Like Alchemix is built on Urine Finance, and the DAI vault for Urine Finance is doing a bunch of weird stuff behind the scenes that we don't really know or care about. It's just like we just know that it's generating yield for the DAI stablecoin, right? But I guess we don't really have anything like that. We don't have like a yield.
An aggregator of sorts.
Yeah, like just like some kind of vault. So essentially, you'd almost be creating that yourselves, then, huh?
Yeah, I mean, if a team comes out and puts it together, we would be ecstatic to work with them and integrate them as like our core functionality, and then like add them into the kind of like default set of vaults, but default set of strategies. But until that comes to fruition, we can't really assume that it will happen.
Okay, I think that's all for me. I don't know if anyone else in the audience has any other questions, or perhaps Ryan, don't know what else is on our agenda for the space.
Yeah, I think we've managed to cover most of the bases here, and yeah, last opportunity if anyone wants to come and ask any questions. I guess the obvious question that we haven't asked is, how far away from launch are you guys roughly?
We're aiming to launch within Q1, and that is the goal. I've definitely been burned by giving more exact timelines, so we want to leave it more like as in Q1. But we're working as hard as we can, and as fast as we can to get everything tested, to go through the sequences to launch. The like core product is like ready and ready to go. It's just the token part and the token launch part is the part that's I would say primarily slowing us down.
Interesting. So have you completed audits on your main smart contracts?
We have a team of like people going through the contracts right now, and then on top of that, we have scheduled audits that will come to fruition in the near future. So its launch is kind of like coordinated across like getting public facing audits and getting the launch contracts ready to go.
Exciting times. And if people want to follow along with what you guys are doing, where's the best place to follow, and where's the best place to come and engage if people have got questions?
Yeah.
I think obviously Twitter is a good one. We have a Telegram as well. We're mainly using it as an announcement channel for now, just because we saw how much questions get asked in other announcement channels, and we just don't have the resources right now to have a person just being on Telegram answering questions. However, that doesn't mean we're not answering questions to anyone. Feel free to slide in our Twitter DMs. We generally answer anything that's not a marketing promotion request. So if you have any curious questions, just shoot them to us either in the Twitter comments or just in the DMs. And yeah, just keep an eye on our Twitter. That's pretty much where we will post every kind of new announcement or content.
Do you guys have a white paper or light paper that's available? And if not, is that coming?
We don't at this time. We're working on like a series of blog posts to like explain things a lot more clearly. And I'd say like possibly these blog posts could be combined into something of a light paper. At least for me, like the Terra ecosystem seems to be very adept with light papers, so we may add one just because that is the norm. But since the protocol can be like pretty explained pretty well without a paper, we may also just try to do more informational blogs that can be synthesized and read easier by a wider audience.
Makes sense. I do have a final question coming in here from Gladius Maximus. If you want to come in and ask a question before we close out here, you're more than welcome to.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to have a question, and this comes up a lot, even on Anchor, about degen box and also for kinetic money, people looping things. Does it really matter where the money is coming from? Right? If the money is coming from $1,000 from from somebody putting it initially, or somebody looping it, does that really matter to the protocol?
It doesn't. I wouldn't say it matters where the money comes from. It matters more in the stability of the protocol. So we can easily see that that the degen box and various other means that various other users of Anchor are just depleting the reserve faster than expected. And so like a lower reserve could lead to a more unstable protocol or lower yields, and so on. And so it doesn't really matter where the funds come from. In my opinion, it's more of the safety and stability of the protocol that matters the most.
So that's then more of a question of scalability of the protocol than or where the money is coming from. So I think people are. I think we need to reframe this more about scalability. And if you look at MIM, they're limiting how much they're pushing out to MIM. So it's almost like putting a brake on how much AUST can be minted, because there is no brake on AUST, and maybe there's no brake on KUST, and it is that brake that makes the protocol stable. So we don't have a brake, and then we're complaining that we're getting too much money coming in, but really we just need to manage stability some way. And I guess on Anchor, they're managing stability by having this buffer of a stability of the yield reserve and hoping that the new collateral is going to come in through new interest, lower interest rates. So how are you potentially thinking about putting a limit on how much KUST can be withdrawn?
Yeah, so there's a debt cap associated to KUST, and so in the sense that if there's 20 million in the phaser, but there's 100 million in the vaults, that means at a 50% ratio, it's like 50 million can be minted, and maybe at that point in time, maybe only 30 million can be minted. But this doesn't mean that the user shouldn't still deposit their AUST or their UST because they're gaining a credit. So when the debt cap increases, then they'll be able to mint KUST. So in this case, we're doing it this way so we can assure ourselves a stable swap between KUST and UST. Because if all of a sudden the debt cap is increased to $1 billion and people come in and take that $1 billion, if there isn't sufficient use case or liquidity to trade that KUST to UST, then the KUST peg can easily break.
Okay, thanks so much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thanks for the good question.
Botmuncher, do you want to come back in? I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Hey, just one more question. Just it's a curiosity question, and if you don't want to answer it, if it's something personal or something like this, Phil, you can, no problem. Just curious. It sounds like you said that there's no VCs that have given money, and I guess it sounds like you guys haven't raised in any other way. So I mean, that's really cool. It's neat. It's exciting. More communal launch fashion. But just curious, like, how are you guys been funding? Are you're just the team was able to work by themselves and just bootstrap, or how have you guys been working?
Yeah. So in this sense, like a lot of us have been in crypto for a while, and so with the recent bull market and the recent like push of Luna and push of various other projects and airdrops within the Cosmos ecosystem, we were able to say like, oh, like if we were to take funds, we feel like that would just add a lot more bloat to ourselves, and we like being lean and fast, and so we just decided to like do it on our own. Of course, this means that like some people like myself, like I'm not really taking a salary at this time, but for me, like the staking rewards and stuff like that in Luna and in other ecosystems is like more than enough to live off. So I'm like happy to do it, and it's also for me, it's like a passion project, and so it's like something like I actually want to use or actually want to see exist in Terra.
That's so cool. That's awesome. That's really inspiring. Like, not that it's any payment, but you know, we look up to you for doing that. That's cool.
Thank you.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, a really inspirational approach to things that we're not particularly used to in the crypto space. So it's an interesting story to hear. If you don't have a hard stop, I think DeFi Zealot's up here to ask a question. We may as well run through as many questions as people have.
Yeah, hey, I'll keep it short and quick here. One thing when I was playing around on your website with the auto replaying loans little app that you have up there, I'm trying to understand the APY part, why that is variable and it's not fixed. Is it something that you choose? Like I understand the self-repaying loan part. You know, you lock up your principal, you take a loan, buy something, and then it automatically pays off, and you can take the loan again after it pays off. That part is clear, but why is the APY variable? And is this something that we're speculating that it would be between 20% to 40%, and it'll be variable, or is it just there for us to like make some guesses, I guess? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, definitely. So the reason why it's on the bottom end, it's roughly 20% is kind of like to model it against something like Anchor, and then the higher end would be like 2 times Anchor. Of course, like we do have plans on exceeding this, but it's kind of also to like just gauge like a mental model of like, oh, if I were to take this loan and if it was at this percentage, like how fast would it pay it back? And so because it won't be like a guaranteed like 40%, and because as the phaser grows, the yield will grow as well, but as more collateral comes in on the volt side, then it will kind of decrease the amount of boost that's coming from the phaser. But then it's kind of like it's like a seesaw, like a teeter totter. It's kind of like as one is growing, the other one is like being reduced, but then over time the other one is growing as well.
Okay, so it's basically like I can count on it being 20% as the least. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, 20%. So it's entirely dependent on Anchor for right now, and so it would be roughly around the same as Anchor.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Cool. Thanks for the question, DeFi Zealot. I don't think we have anyone else lined up here. So just to reiterate, if people want to follow what Kinetic are doing, you can catch them mostly on their Twitter or maybe in their Telegram. We have a potential Q1 launch upcoming with no specific date stated, but keep an eye out for that. Anything else you guys want to add in here before we close up?
Just thanks for hosting us, GT. We really like working with you guys. Thanks for everyone for listening in, and thanks for coming along the journey with us.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, GT, but also thanks to all the community. We have seen great support, although we're about to finally launch. So we haven't launched it, but have still seen great support, and which is also why we decided to do kind of a more sizey airdrop for the community. So yeah, thanks everyone, and we're excited to really get that product out so we can finally all use it and play around with it. And I'm super excited for what's to come.